They banished Eleanor Marrowen from the Sainted Moon Chapel for repeating the last words of a dead king. Not for lying, not for stealing, for remembering too much. She stood beneath the carved wolf saints with rainwater, darkening the hem of her plain black dress. One hand wrapped around the small bone prayer bead King Rowan Davenant had pressed into her palm before his final breath. Around her, the court gathered in silver mourning cloaks, faces smooth with the relief of grief arranged into ceremony. The Sainted Moon Chapel did not answer sorrow. It answered oath breath, a promise spoken by a dying crowned king beneath moon witness. False grief faded into its stones. A true royal oath waited there until someone tried to bury it. Duke Osgar Penrose held the official death record in both hands. "There is no land clause," he said. Eleanor looked at the parchment. "Because you left it out." A quiet moved through the chapel, thin and dangerous. Osgar did not raise his voice. That was what made him effective. "Mistress Marrowen, the kingdom has honored your service in the late king's sick room. No one denies you were present. No one denies the small part that costs you nothing." His mouth softened with public pity, but private grief cannot rewrite royal law. At the altar steps, Wolf King Alistair Davenant stood beneath the old moon window, crowned only 3 days, and already wearing the expression of a man being taught that mercy was something a king could not afford. His black ceremonial coat still bore the white mourning clasp for his father. His eyes had not left Eleanor since she entered. That almost hurt worse. Once, in the candlelit sick room, before the crown had turned him cold, Alistair had taken a hand beside his sleeping father and whispered, "Trust the man I am trying to become." Now he held her fate in silence. Eleanor faced him. "Your father promised to restore the Eastern War estates to the families displaced by his campaigns." Osgar turned the death record toward the court. "The king promised prayers, arms, and memorial stones. Those are recorded. He promised land. He spoke it under moon witness. A dying king's land clause does not need court applause. It needs breath, witness, and stone." Osgar's expression remained carefully saddened, conveniently heard by one woman of no rank, and not entered by the royal scribe, not sealed by chapel clerk, not witnessed by council. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the prayer bead. "He trusted me because I stayed when men with titles found dying inconvenient." Several nobles stiffened. Alistair's jaw moved once. Eleanor. Her name in his mouth was not protection yet, only warning. Osgar used it. Majesty. She has already admitted withholding a portion of this supposed promise. Eleanor looked at him. "I withheld the final clause." A sharper murmur rose. Osgar's expression did not change, but triumph entered his eyes like a candle being shielded from wind. "There, the witness confesses she concealed royal speech." "I concealed nothing from greed," Eleanor said. "I refused to let landless families hear their rights announced in a room that barred them from its doors." Osgar bowed his head as if saddened by her lack of restraint. "And now she speaks of rights before the king, but brings no families, no sealed record, no second witness, no law, only emotion." The official record crackled softly in his hands. Alistair looked toward the parchment, then toward Eleanor. She saw the decision forming before he spoke, not because he hated her. That might have been easier. He feared the cost of believing her. If the promise was real, noble estates would shift. War titles would be questioned. Osgar's holdings would fracture. The crown would begin its reign not with stability, but restitution. "Eleanor Marrowen," Alistair said, voice low enough to sound private and loud enough to wound publicly. "Until proof is produced, you will cease repeating an unrecorded royal oath." She did not lower her eyes. "Your father did not ask me to remember him, only when it was affordable." Osgar's face cooled. "Majesty, this is no longer testimony. It is defiance." Alistair's hand closed around the wolf-head finial of his cane. "You are banished from Sainted Moon Chapel, and from all proceedings concerning the Eastern Estates." The words struck the chapel stone harder than thunder. For one moment, Eleanor heard nothing else. Not the rain, not the court, only the memory of King Rowan's failing breath, and Alistair's younger voice asking her to believe in him. She looked at the man before her. "You once asked me to trust the man you would become." His face tightened. "The king you became just banished the woman who remembered you honestly." That reached him. "Not enough." "Escort her out," Osgar said gently. 2 chapel guards stepped forward. Eleanor did not move. Alistair lifted one hand, then stopped before it became mercy. She saw that too. Do not make hesitation look like kindness. The guards reached for her arms. The sainted moon chapel inhaled. Every candle in the nave bent toward Eleanor. The guards froze. A sound moved through the walls. Slow, damaged, unmistakably human. One breath, then another. Uneven, weak, at the end. The exact rhythm Eleanor had counted beside King Rowan's bed. The chapel did not echo grief. It answered oath breath. Alistair went still. His face lost color. No, he whispered. The chapel exhaled. Dust fell from the eastern wall, revealing pale words beneath layers of whitewash. Not new writing. Old writing, hidden under stonewash and silence. Osgar stepped back. Chapel echo. Grief sometimes wakes old sanctuaries. Eleanor looked at the wall. The breath came again. Then the dead king's voice filled the sainted moon chapel, broken by the same struggle that had torn through his lungs in his final hour. Let the families return. Alistair's cane struck the stone. The wall brightened. A second line uncovered itself beneath the first, jagged and incomplete. The Eastern War estates shall be. Osgar did not deny the chapel had spoken. He denied that stone could write law. The line is unfinished, he said, while the pale words burned across the eastern wall behind him. No court in the Wolf Kingdom has ever transferred land on the strength of half a sentence. The chapel still breathed. Slowly, painfully. The same rhythm Eleanor had heard beside King Rowan's deathbed, when every breath seemed to bargain with the next. The candles leaned toward her again, their flames narrow and silver blue. The Eastern War estates shall be. Nothing followed. Osgar lifted the official death record higher, giving the court something familiar to look at. Let the family's return may refer to memorial rights, burial permissions, or seasonal mourning access. It does not say ownership. It does not say settlement. It does not overturn the signed record. Eleanor looked at the whitewashed wall. A buried oath does not become harmless because the hand that buried it stopped halfway through. Alistair's eyes remained fixed on the glowing words. His face had not recovered its color. What is oath breath? He asked. Osgar answered before Eleanor could. An old chapel superstition. Eleanor turned toward Alistair. Ask the chapel clerk, not the duke whose land depends on ignorance. Osgar's mouth tightened. Majesty, grief has made her reckless. No, Eleanor said. Grief made me stay. Recklessness belongs to the men who left your father's last promise alone, with a woman they planned not to believe. The words struck Alistair visibly. Not enough to undo his order. Enough to make him look at the guard still standing beside her. Osgar saw that and moved quickly. The banishment was lawfully spoken. Until this chapel echo is examined, Mistress Marrowen should be removed. Her prayer bead may have triggered a grief memory. Eleanor looked down at the bone bead in her palm. King Rowan had pressed it into her hand after whispering the final clause, his fingers cold and stubborn around hers. Alistair saw her hand close over it. Why did my father give you that? He asked. Eleanor's throat tightened. Because he knew his written record could be handled by men who did not want the living poor to hear it. Osgar gave a soft, almost saddened sigh. Or because a dying man gave comfort to the woman attending him. The bead is chapel bone. It is not comfort. It is witness. A low sound moved under the floor. The two guards reached for her arms again. This time, the aisle changed before they touched her. Silver script burst from the stone beneath Eleanor's feet and ran in a bright line toward the chapel doors. Not words of welcome, words of refusal. Banishment path unsealed, while oath breath remains active. The guard stopped hard enough that one stumbled. Alistair stared at the words beneath her. False order? False in ritual timing, Majesty, Osgar said. Not false in accusation. The chapel may object to removal during an active echo. That does not make Mistress Marrowen's claim law. Eleanor did not step away from the script. Alistair's voice lowered. Then no one removes her while it speaks. Eleanor looked at him. Do not call that trust. His jaw tightened. I know. Good. The single word left him without refuge. Alistair turned to the nearest priest. Summon the chapel clerk. The priest bowed and sent a novice through the side arch. Osgar held the death record still. Majesty, clerks record what living witnesses provide. The official record remains complete. Then why was the wall whitewashed? Eleanor asked. Osgar looked at her. Chapels are restored during mourning periods. Paint is not conspiracy, especially when a king's decline turns every servant into a collector of relics. The insult was dressed too neatly for the court to call it cruelty. Eleanor held the prayer bead until its bone edge pressed into her palm. Ask when. Alistair turned slowly. When was the eastern wall covered? The priest hesitated. That would be in the chapel maintenance roll, Majesty. Bring it. Osgar stepped closer. You are allowing her to direct royal inquiry. She is asking questions the official record did not answer. She is accused of inventing an oath. No, Eleanor said. I was banished for remembering one. The chapel breathed again. Dust trembled over the incomplete line. Alistair flinched at the sound, and Eleanor knew why. He was hearing not a miracle, but his father struggling to speak while he had been elsewhere, learning how to inherit power. A thin ache crossed his face. She looked away before he could ask pity from her. The chapel clerk arrived, bent and breathless, carrying a narrow roll of pale vellum. Majesty, he said, voice shaking. The maintenance roll. Alistair did not touch it at first. Who ordered the whitewash? The clerk looked at Osgar. That was answer enough to darken the room, but not enough to prove anything. Osgar smiled without warmth. Many estate patrons fund chapel preservation. Looking at me will not change ink. Alistair took the roll. Read it. The clerk broke the small wax seal and unrolled the vellum. His fingers shook as he found the eastern wall entry. Eleanor watched Osgar's face. Calm. Too calm. The clerk swallowed. Eastern wall restoration. Sainted Moon Chapel. Whitewash approved to preserve mourning purity after royal decline. Alistair's voice was quiet. Date. The clerk looked down. The chapel's breath stopped. Read the date, Alistair said. The clerk obeyed. Chapel wall record. Whitewash ordered before death record was sealed. Osgar did not deny the whitewash. He denied why it had been ordered. Mourning purity is not concealment, he said, while the chapel clerk still held the maintenance roll with both shaking hands. Sainted Moon Chapel was prepared for a dying king. Walls are washed. Candles are replaced. Old inscriptions are sealed when grief threatens to turn every stone into prophecy. The eastern wall glowed behind him. The eastern war estates shall be still unfinished, still breathing. Eleanor felt each breath in her ribs, not as comfort, but as duty. King Rowan had struggled for every word. Now the chapel struggled too. Alistair looked at the maintenance roll. Who requested the wall covered? The clerk's eyes flicked toward Osgar again. Osgar gave a restrained sigh. Estate patrons often fund chapel preservation. My house has supported Sainted Moon for generations. That is not sinister. It is service. Eleanor looked at him. Service usually leaves less plaster over inconvenient words. Or more protection over sacred walls, Osgar replied. Mistress Marrowen turns preservation into accusation, because accusation is all she brought. Alistair's hand tightened on the wolf-head cane. Read the request line. The clerk bent over the vellum. Request field is abbreviated, Majesty. Read it as written. The chapel breath stopped for one long second. The clerk obeyed. Requested by estate office. Which estate office? Alistair asked. The clerk swallowed. The line is shortened. Osgar stepped in smoothly. Because maintenance rolls are not land courts. Their purpose is expense, labor, and timing, not political ownership. Eleanor turned toward Alistair. Ask who approved it. Osgar's gaze sharpened. Again she directs the crown. No, Eleanor said. I direct him toward the line you keep walking around. Alistair did not look away from the roll. Approval. The clerk read. Approved by chapel steward under patron instruction. Name the patron. Majesty, Osgar said, voice still gentle. Patron instruction may refer to a household, a steward, or a fund. If we are to drag old maintenance shorthand into accusation, then any noble who ever paid for candle oil may find himself on trial. Eleanor lifted the bone prayer bead. Any noble who ordered a wall covered before a dying king's record was sealed should be willing to say why. A low sound moved under the chapel floor. Not a growl. A breath turning toward stone. Alistair looked at the bead. Was the whitewash ordered before or after my father gave you that? Eleanor's fingers closed around it. After. Osgar answered too quickly. She claims. The bone bead chilled in Eleanor's palm. The chapel wall dimmed. then brightened again. A thin line of script appeared beneath the unfinished oath. Prayer bone transfer recorded. Alistair went still. The words did not clear Eleanor. They did not complete the oath. They only proved that the bead had not been a sentimental trinket, pressed into a grieving attendant's hand. It had entered chapel memory. Osgar bowed his head. A dying king may give witness tokens for comfort, blessing, gratitude, or memory. None of those transfers land. The bead is chapel bone, Eleanor said. It is not comfort. It is witness. He looked at her with patient pity. And yet a witness token without a complete clause cannot transfer land. No, Eleanor said. That is why you are so eager to keep the clause incomplete. Alistair inhaled, as if the words struck a place he had tried not to expose. Still no apology. Good. Eleanor did not want one while guards still stood near the doors that had almost carried her out. Alistair turned to the clerk. Was the eastern wall inspected before the death record was sealed? The clerk's mouth opened, then closed. Osgar's voice cooled. Majesty, chapel clerks are not required to inspect every decorative surface before royal scribes seal a death record. Decorative? Eleanor looked at the glowing wall. Your father's final breath is under that stone. Alistair's eyes cut toward her. Pain moved through them before he locked it away. She looked aside before it could ask anything of her. The clerk found another column. Inspection field exists, Majesty. Read it. Eastern wall condition. Prepared. Inscription visibility. Covered for mourning purity. Date? Alistair asked. The clerk read the same date again, before the death record was sealed. The chapel candles bent. Osgar spread one hand, calm as winter. Prepared does not mean hidden. Covered does not mean erased. The official death record remains the only sealed legal account of King Rowan's last commands. Then ask whether a draft existed before that final record, Eleanor said. Osgar turned on her, still polite. Mistress Marrowen, you withheld a final clause by your own confession. Perhaps the draft you seek would prove not fraud, but your unreliability. The court liked that. Eleanor heard it in the softened murmurs. Alistair heard it too. This time, he did not follow it. Not yet, he said. Osgar looked at him. Majesty? The draft comes after the wall request is named. Eleanor felt the chapel breathe once behind her. Slow, almost relieved. Alistair pointed to the maintenance roll. Expand the abbreviation. The clerk shook his head faintly. It cannot be expanded from this roll alone, Majesty. The full request would be copied into the patron ledger. Bring it. Osgar's smile returned, thin and reasonable. The patron ledger is kept with estate accounts. It is not stored in the chapel. Whose estate accounts? Alistair asked. The chapel went silent. Osgar did not. Many estates contribute to chapel preservation, he said. You will find Penrose funds, Davenant funds, smaller houses, widow endowments. Whose account holds this request? Alistair asked. The clerk's face had gone pale. He turned the maintenance roll over, where a narrow backing strip bore a copied filing mark. His voice dropped. Patron filing mark. Alistair stepped closer. Read it. The clerk did. Whitewash order. Requested by Penrose Estate Office. Osgar did not deny the Penrose filing mark. He denied whose hand had used it. Penrose Estate Office is not Duke Penrose standing with a brush in the Eastern Isle, he said, calm enough to make the absurdity sound like reason. Estate stewards approve preservation requests every season. Sainted Moon Chapel has survived centuries because noble houses fund what the crown neglects. The chapel clerk still held the maintenance roll open. Whitewash order. Requested by Penrose Estate Office. Eleanor watched the court receive the explanation. Some were already relieved. A great house could have offices, stewards, clerks, layers of polite distance. A woman of no rank only had her own mouth to be blamed through. Alistair did not close the roll. Who signed the patron ledger? Osgar inclined his head. If there is a signature, it will be a steward's. That will prove administration, not fraud. Bring the patron ledger, Alistair said. A priest sent 2 novices through the south arch. Osgar turned toward Eleanor. Mistress Marrowen would have the court believe that chapel maintenance, estate donations, mourning, paint, and a half-uncovered sentence form a conspiracy because she alone wishes them to. Eleanor lifted the bone prayer bead. It had warmed again, as if it remembered being held by a dying king. I wish less than you think. Then, why conceal the final clause? Osgar asked. The question struck the hall hard. Alistair looked at her. There it was again, the part she had already admitted, the weapon Osgar would keep sharpening until it cut deeper than truth. Eleanor did not hide from it. Because the families were not here, Osgar's mouth softened. A noble sentiment, also convenient. A witness who withholds the ending controls when the room may hear law. No, Eleanor said. A room that bars displaced families from their own restitution controls who gets to call justice disorder. Murmurs rose. The court liked property better when the poor were absent from it. Alistair's face hardened, not against her, not fully against Osgar, against the shape of the problem he had chosen not to see until Stone forced him. Still, he did not defend her yet. Was the whitewash request filed before or after the prayer bone transfer? He asked. The clerk answered from the maintenance roll. After, Majesty. Osgar spread his hands. After a dying king distributed chapel tokens, the chapel required restoration. That is ordinary. Men near death leave grief everywhere. Eleanor looked at him. Your poetry is better when it hides profit. Your accusation improves when it avoids proof. The novices returned, with a broad, brown ledger bound in estate leather. One placed it on the altar table, then stepped back as if the book itself might accuse him. Alistair opened it. Signature. The chapel clerk bent close. Patron request for Eastern Wall morning wash. Filed under Penrose Estate Office. Signed by Steward Merrick Vale. Osgar bowed faintly. As I said, a steward. Alistair's thumb pressed against the page. Is Steward Vale present? A steward near the back of the chapel went pale. Osgar looked over his shoulder. Merrick is elderly. He signs what the office requires. The old steward stepped forward anyway, hands shaking. Majesty. Osgar's voice remained gentle. Careful, Merrick. Speak only to what you remember. Eleanor heard the warning, under the kindness. Alistair did too. Who instructed you to file the whitewash request? He asked. Merrick Vale looked at Osgar, then at the glowing eastern wall. The office. Alistair's voice lowered. Whose order reached your desk? Merrick swallowed. A sealed memorandum. From whom? Osgar spoke before the steward could. Estate memoranda are often prepared by multiple hands. Eleanor looked at Alistair. Ask who sealed it. Osgar's gaze cut to her. Again, she directs the crown. No, Eleanor said. I direct the question toward the hand you keep hiding behind paper. Alistair held out his hand. The memorandum. Merrick fumbled inside his coat and withdrew a folded slip. Old but carefully preserved. I kept it because the timing troubled me. Osgar's expression did not change. A steward preserving old paper proves caution, not guilt. Alistair broke the outer fold. The chapel did not breathe. Not yet. He read the seal mark. Penrose private office. Osgar's voice sharpened by a thread. Still not a crime. No, Eleanor said. Only another door. Alistair looked toward her then, and the grief in his face was raw enough that she had to look away before it became her burden to carry. He turned back to Merrick. Who sealed the official death record after the wall was covered? The chapel clerk answered. Not the steward. The death record was sealed by royal scribe, council witness, and estate witness. Name the estate witness, Alistair said. Osgar smiled thinly. Majesty, estate witnesses attend death records to protect continuity of land taxation. Their presence is standard. Name him. The clerk's voice dropped. Duke Osgar Penrose. The court shifted. Osgar lifted his chin. Yes, I witnessed the record as senior Eastern landholder. If anything, that proves lawful presence. Eleanor's fingers closed around the bead. Ask whether there was a draft before the final parchment. Osgar turned to her fully. Enough. You withheld the final clause. You carry the prayer bone. And now every record you demand somehow bends toward your story. At what point does the court ask whether Mistress Marrowen is seeking truth or arranging a performance? The accusation landed. Alistair looked at Eleanor. She felt it, the court waiting for him to choose comfort again. Her voice stayed steady. Ask the draft. For a moment, he did nothing. That moment hurt more than she wished it did. Then Alistair turned to the chapel clerk. Was there a death record draft? The clerk nodded slowly. One. Where? In the sealed scribe box beneath the altar. Open it. Osgar stepped forward. Majesty, drafts are not law. No, Alistair said. But altered drafts may explain why law lied. The priest unlocked the altar box with trembling hands and withdrew a thin parchment tied in black ribbon. The chapel's breath returned. One breath, then another. The ribbon loosened by itself. The draft opened beneath the moon window. A line of dark ink crossed out the middle of the king's final command. Alistair read it silently first. Then his hand tightened around the parchment until it shook. The chapel wall brightened behind him. Death record draft. Land clause removed under Penrose's seal. The black ribbon fell from the draft like a dead thing. No one bent to pick it up. Alistair stood beneath the moon window with the unfinished oath glowing behind him and the altered death record in his hands. For the first time since Eleanor had entered Sainted Moon Chapel, the official parchment looked smaller than the truth around it. Osgar recovered first. "A draft is not law," he said. The court seized the sentence almost gratefully. Osgar stepped forward with calm restored to his shoulders. "Drafts are revised. Clauses are removed for clarity, repetition, or legal impossibility. A crossed line under a state seal does not prove malice. It proves review." Eleanor looked at the black ink, crossing through the king's final command. "Review is what powerful men call burial when the grave is made of paper." Alistair did not look up from the draft. "Who crossed it out?" Osgar spread one hand. "The mark indicates a state witness review." I asked who. "Majesty. There were scribes, clerks, witnesses, grieving attendants. Records passed between many hands." "Not that line." The chapel breathed once. Osgar's eyes flicked toward the glowing wall, then back to Alistair. "Even if the clause existed, it remains incomplete on the wall and unsealed in law." Mistress Marrowen herself admitted she withheld the final clause. The room turned toward Eleanor again. She felt the old weight return. One woman made into the place where every missing record could be blamed. Alistair saw it happen. This time, he interrupted it. "Enough." The word struck harder because he had not raised his voice. Osgar bowed slightly. "Majesty, the burden does not return to her because your records opened poorly." Eleanor's hand tightened around the prayer bead. "No gratitude. Not yet." But the sentence stood between her and the court like a door he should have built sooner. Osgar's voice cooled. "Then where would your majesty place the burden?" "On the records." Alistair turned to the chapel clerk. "Bring the final death record. Bring the scribe's copy. Bring the sick room attendance roll." The clerk hesitated. "The attendance roll is not part of oath law. It is part of who was there when oath breath was spoken." Osgar's expression thinned. "Majesty, opening sick room attendance exposes private royal decline." Alistair's fingers closed around the draft. "My father's decline has already been used to dismiss the woman who stayed through it. We will survive seeing who left." That cost him. The court heard it. So did Eleanor. She remembered the sick room, the sour medicine, the cold cloth, King Rowan's fingers scraping at the bed linen, while men of rank whispered in corridors about succession and estate stability. Alistair had visited. He had wept once in silence by the window, thinking she did not see. Then Osgar had called him away. Power always knew when to separate the grieving from the witnesses. The chapel clerk returned with a sealed bundle from beneath the side altar. The final death record lay on top, crisp and lawful. Beneath it was a thinner roll, stained at one edge with candle wax. Osgar nodded toward the top parchment. "The final record is the controlling document." Alistair looked at Eleanor. "Which opens first?" The question hurt. Not because it was wrong, but because it was late. Eleanor answered without softening. "Do not ask me like you are sharing authority. Ask because you banished the witness before reading the room she stood in." His face took the blow. "You are right," he said. The chapel went utterly still. Eleanor hated the small ache that moved through her at hearing that. She had wanted him to be right years ago, when it mattered less publicly and more deeply. Alistair turned back to the clerk. "Open the attendance roll." Osgar's brows lifted. "Not the final record?" "Not first." "Why?" Alistair looked at the guards near the door, then at Eleanor. "Because I used rank to decide whose memory was worth keeping. I will not repeat that by opening the clean parchment before the stained one." The candle-waxed roll was untied. Names appeared in uneven rows. Royal physician, Mon priest, 2 chamber guards, Duke Oscar Penrose, 3 council witnesses, then a blank space. The clerk frowned. "There is scraping." Eleanor already knew. She had known by the way the sick room had felt the morning after Rowan died, when her stool had been removed and the basin she had washed his hands in had disappeared. Alistair's voice dropped. Read the erased line. I cannot, Majesty. The chapel answered for him. The bone bead chilled in Eleanor's palm. On the eastern wall, beneath the unfinished oath, silver dust fell in a narrow stream. Letters rose through the scraped attendance roll, thin at first, then bright. Eleanor Marrowen, final hour's witness. Alistair stopped breathing. Osgar did not panic. An attendance line proves presence, not accuracy. No, Eleanor said, but it proves I was not a ghost invited into this room only when useful. Alistair lowered the roll slowly. The chapel breath shook around him, the same rough rhythm of the father he had chosen to remember through official ink. He turned toward the court. My banishment order against Eleanor Marrowen is suspended under chapel witness law, he said. Not erased, not forgiven. Suspended because I spoke it before reading the record that named her. Eleanor looked at him then. He had learned not to make the correction look clean. Osgar's mouth hardened. A suspended banishment does not complete an oath. No, Alistair said. It only admits why the witness was removed. He reached for the final death record at last. The chapel candles bent toward the parchment. The clerk broke the seal. Beneath King Rowan's recorded prayers, arms, and memorial stones, a narrow witness field had been scraped nearly white. Alistair's hand tightened. The wall brightened before he spoke. Private death record. Final witness line removed. Osgar looked at the scraped witness field and chose concern. It suited him better than fear. Majesty, he said. A removed witness line may indicate protection. Sickroom attendants are often omitted from royal death records to preserve household privacy. Eleanor stared at the pale scar where her name had been cut away from the final record. Privacy. That was what men called erasure when the knife had dried. Alistair did not answer at once. The Sainted Moon Chapel breathed around him, slow and damaged, as if every stone waited to see whether he would again choose the cleanest lie. Who ordered the witness line removed? He asked. Osgar gave a small bow. The death office may have followed standard practice. That is not a name. No, Eleanor said quietly. It is the place names go when powerful men need them to disappear. Osgar turned to her. And yet you still have not spoken the final clause. The court shifted, grateful for a way back to her. There it was, the hook beneath every kindness, every record, every glowing wall. Alistair looked at her. Not coldly now. Worse, as if he needed her answer and hated needing it. Eleanor, he said, why did you conceal it? The question moved through her like the old sickroom draft. She could still see King Rowan's hand shaking around hers, the bone bead between their palms, his lips gray with effort. Let the families return. And then the part she had carried alone, because the chapel doors had been closed to the people whose lives it would change. She lifted her chin, because it was not yours to hear first. A sharp murmur broke through the nobles. Osgar's eyes brightened. There, she admits she placed herself above the crown. No, Eleanor said. I placed the displaced families beside it. Alistair's grip tightened on the final record. What families? The words were too soft. Too late. Her gaze echoed to him. The families your father's wars pushed out of the eastern estates. The tenants who buried children on roadside ground because their village fields became military pasture. The widows who paid rent twice, once to survive, once to be told they no longer belonged. Osgar's voice hardened politely. War relocation was lawful. Lawful is a cold blanket, Eleanor said, and it never covered them. The chapel candles bent toward her. Alistair looked at the wall, then back at Eleanor. My father named them? He asked for them. Then why not tell me? She almost laughed. It would have sounded broken. Because when I told you there was land in the oath, you banished me before asking who the land was for. That struck him visibly. Still, she did not give him comfort. Osgar stepped forward. Majesty, the court cannot let a concealed clause become leverage. If Mistress Marrowen truly cared for these families, she would have brought them to testify. I tried, Eleanor said. The chapel went silent. Alistair's head turned slowly. What? Eleanor opened her hand. The bone bead lay against her palm, dull, white, faintly silver at its cracks. I sent 3 petitions to admit them to Sainted Moon Chapel before the death rite. All returned. No seal, No hearing, no reason. Osgar's expression softened with administrative pity. Security restrictions were necessary during royal decline. Crowding a dying king's chapel with displaced claimants would have turned grief into unrest. They were not claimants, Eleanor said. They were the people his promise belonged to. Alistair's voice had changed. Who denied the petitions? Osgar answered before any clerk could move. The chapel gate office handles access lists. Bring them, Alistair said. Osgar bowed his head. Majesty, access denials prove only caution. Then caution can be read aloud. A novice hurried to the side archive. Eleanor watched him go and felt suddenly tired down to the bone. Not weak, just worn by the long labor of being truthful in rooms where truth had to be dragged in by stone. Alistair stepped half a pace toward her, then stopped. Good. He remembered her warning. You should have been heard, he said. No, she answered. They should have been. The correction landed harder than any accusation. The novice returned, with a narrow packet tied in grey cord. The chapel clerk opened it beneath the moon window. 3 petitions. Eleanor recognized the folded corners. She had pressed them flat with trembling hands, careful to write every family name clearly, because names were the first thing power blurred. The clerk read the first denial. Petition to admit Eastern displaced families to final oath witness. Denied under security discretion. Alistair's voice was low. Signature? The clerk swallowed. Gate office mark. Read all 3. The second, the third. Same denial. Sama mark. Osgar spread his hands. No Penrose name, no royal command, no proof of malice. Eleanor looked at him. You are very fond of officers that have no hands. The chapel breath returned. The eastern wall brightened. Then, for the first time, the incomplete oath changed. Words formed beneath the unfinished line, not completing it, but refusing to continue without what had been barred. Oath breath paused. Rightful witnesses absent. Admit the displaced families. The chapel did not finish the oath. It simply waited. The eastern wall held its pale, unfinished sentence, while every candle in Sainted Moon Chapel burned low and blue. The court had gone quiet in the way courts did when truth required them to make room for people they preferred to discuss from a distance. Osgar recovered first. Rightful witnesses is a devotional phrase, he said. Old chapels speak in symbols. It may refer to saints, prior kings, council witnesses. It named the displaced families, Eleanor said. It demanded admission, Alistair said. Osgar turned smoothly. Majesty, admitting displaced claimants into a royal death. Oath proceeding would turn grief into petition, petition into pressure, and pressure into unrest. Eleanor looked at him. You call hungry people unrest, so no one has to call them neighbors. A few nobles looked away. Alistair's hand tightened around the prayer bead packet. Send for them. The order should have settled the room. It did not. The priest of the old wolf throne stepped forward. Majesty, the chapel doors are sealed for royal oath inquiry. Opening them to unverified claimants may compromise the right. Osgar bowed faintly, as if saddened by necessity. Exactly. Let the Crown appoint representatives later. A proper commission can hear their concerns once the record is stabilized. Eleanor laughed once, softly. Alistair looked at her. She did not soften the sound. A commission is where promises go to die politely. Osgar's face cooled. Mistress Marrowen, you are not helping the people you claim to defend by provoking the court. No, she said. I helped no one by trusting the court to invite them. The words hurt, because they included herself. She had believed once that if she spoke carefully enough, if she waited for the right hour, if she protected the final clause until the right ears were present, the powerful might choose decency without being forced. Then Alistair had banished her. Then the chapel had to breathe for the dead. Alistair stepped toward her, stopping before closeness became claim. Eleanor, tell me where they are. I will have them brought safely. She looked at him. Safely means what? His brow tightened. Under guard, past nobles who already call them claimants, into a chapel where their rights are treated as disturbance. She lifted the bone bead. Do not ask me to deliver them into the same room that tried to drag me out. Alistair absorbed that. Osgar moved into the space her refusal opened. There. She will not produce the witnesses. Majesty, this is the pattern. A hidden clause. Absent families. Unfinished wall. Always one more condition before proof. Eleanor turned to him. The condition is that the people named by the oath be allowed to stand inside it. That is not your condition to set. No, she said. It was your condition when you kept them outside. The chapel floor answered with a faint tremor. Dust loosened from the arches. No new words formed. Only the breathing thinned. Alistair heard it. What is happening? The chapel clerk's voice shook. Oath breath is weakening, Majesty. Osgar seized the moment. Because the rite has been disrupted. Eleanor looked at the wall. The unfinished line seemed dimmer now, as if King Rowan's final breath had been forced to wait too long once more. She understood then. The chapel was not a weapon she could keep aimed at Osgar. It was not a shield she could hold forever, while the families remained beyond the doors. It was a witness. And witnesses could be misused too. She closed her hand around the prayer bead. I will not continue. Alistair went still. What? I will not stand here and let them make me the substitute for everyone your doors excluded. Osgar's eyes sharpened. A refusal to cooperate. Eleanor faced him. A refusal to be useful in the wrong way. Alistair's voice lowered. If you leave now, the court will say you stopped the oath because it could not prove what you claimed. They already said I invented it while your father's breath was speaking through stone. He flinched. She hated that she noticed. She hated more that some part of her still remembered the man who had once whispered that he wanted to become worthy of trust. Eleanor, he said, do not make me lose the only path to his promise. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she gave him the truth cleanly, because she had loved him once, and because love without dignity was only another chapel with whitewashed walls. I did not make you lose it. You banished the witness before you opened the door. The words landed between them and stayed. Alistair did not defend himself. Good. She turned toward the nave. The guards near the doors looked to the king. Alistair looked at Eleanor's back. Then he said, let her pass. Osgar spoke at once. Majesty, she will not be held, because this court prefers her trapped. Eleanor paused at the threshold, but did not turn around. Behind her, the chapel exhaled. The unfinished oath vanished from the eastern wall. Every candle went black except one, burning over the empty doorway where the displaced families should have entered. Then new words appeared above the altar, cold and clear. Royal oath, recording suspended until rightful witnesses stand within the chapel. The chapel doors would not close. 3 priests tried in silence, pulling at the carved wolf handles while rain blew across the threshold and gathered in bright puddles on the stone. The doors held open, not by force anyone could see, but by refusal old enough to feel like law. Above the altar, the words remained cold and clear. Royal oath recording suspended until rightful witnesses stand within the chapel. Alistair read them once. Then he turned from the altar. Open the outer gates, he said. Osgar's face remained composed. Majesty, the storm is rising. The outer courtyard is crowded with mourners, servants, petitioners, displaced families among them. Osgar did not answer quickly enough. That was answer enough to make the chapel candles flicker. Alistair looked to the captain of the chapel guard. Send riders to the eastern quarter, the old granary road, the lower bridge shelters, and every lodging house holding families displaced by the eastern campaigns. They are to be brought under crown-safe passage. Osgar stepped forward. Majesty, such an order suggests their claim has merit before it has been heard. No, Alistair said. It suggests they will be allowed to hear an oath about their own lives. The words sounded simple. They cost him. Every noble in the chapel understood the danger of letting landless families enter a royal proceeding not as beggars, but as witnesses. Osgar understood most of all. Then proper lists are needed, he said. Names must be verified. False claimants will come if the chapel doors are opened. Alistair looked at him. Where are the lists? The Eastern relocation rolls are under estate custody for tax continuity. Whose estate custody? Osgar's mouth tightened by a fraction. Penrose custody, as senior Eastern landholder. A low breath moved through the chapel. Alistair's eyes hardened. You hold the whitewash request, the estate witness line, and the relocation rolls. I hold lawful custody of records entrusted to my office. Not anymore. The court went still. Osgar bowed his head. Majesty, Duke Osgar Penrose is suspended from custody over all Eastern estate records, chapel maintenance rolls, death record drafts, relocation lists, and war displacement accounts until the oath inquiry is complete. Osgar's calm thinned. You would strip a duke of lawful custody because a chapel refused to close its doors. Because every locked record keeps opening toward you. That was not accusation. Not yet. It was worse for Osgar because it was procedure. Alistair turned to the clerk. Bring the relocation rolls. The clerk hesitated. Majesty, those are held in Penrose archive. Then send Crown officers to retrieve them. Osgar's voice lowered. Your first public act as king will be to raid the archive of an Eastern duke. My first public act as king was banishing the woman my father trusted, Alistair said. I am correcting the second. The chapel did not glow. It did not praise him. Good. Repair was not performance. Outside the open doors, Eleanor stood beneath the rain-dark arch. Alistair saw her only when the lightning turned the courtyard silver. She had not left the grounds. She stood with her black dress soaked at the hem and the bone bead closed in her fist, watching him through a doorway he had once ordered her dragged through. He walked toward the threshold, but stopped before crossing it. Eleanor. She did not step closer. If you came to call me back, you are still thinking like a king with an empty room. I came to tell you the gates are opening. For whom? For the displaced families. Her expression did not soften. Under guard. Under crown-safe passage. That can mean escort. It can also mean custody. He took the correction without defense. Then, under witness protection, no one brought here will be questioned alone, named claimant before being heard, or removed for speaking of the Eastern estates. She studied him through the rain. Write it. Alistair turned to the clerk waiting behind him. Record that order. The clerk bent over fresh parchment. Eleanor's gaze stayed on Alistair. Do not make them grateful for being admitted to what was already theirs to hear. I will not. You said that too quickly. He swallowed. Then I will learn it slowly, and still do it now. For a moment, the storm filled the space between them. She looked away first. Not because she yielded, because his regret was not her work to tend. Behind Alistair, Osgar spoke loudly enough for the court, and the threshold both. Majesty, allowing Mistress Marrowen to set terms from outside the chapel, gives her power no witness should hold. Eleanor answered without re-entering. I am not setting terms. The chapel did. Osgar's eyes cut toward her. And yet the chapel answers whenever you are near. Yes, she said, that is what frightens you. The Living Oath Chapel inhaled. The open doors widened another inch. Far beyond the courtyard, from the lower road, came the first sound of wheels over wet stone. Not royal carriages. Work carts, hand wagons, walking staffs striking puddles. People. Alistair turned toward the rain. A captain entered from the outer gate, cloak streaming. Majesty. The first Eastern families are at the chapel road. Osgar's face became very still. Eleanor closed her eyes once, as if hearing names before voices reached the hall. Above the altar, the suspended oath dimmed. Then a new line appeared beneath it. Admit them as witnesses, not claimants. The first Eastern family entered, carrying no petition. That was what the court noticed first. No parchment, no seals, no folded pleas prepared for noble hands to reject. Only wet coats, road-stained boots, a child asleep against an old woman's shoulder, and a man with one empty sleeve pinned across his chest. Behind them came more. Families from the lower bridge shelters. Families from Old Granary Road. Families who had once lived under Eastern orchards and now smelled of rain, smoke, and crowded rooms. They did not enter like rebels. They entered like people who had been taught too long that every doorway could become a warning. Osgar watched them with composed distaste, disguised as concern. Majesty, these people must be organized before testimony begins. Eleanor stood outside the threshold until the last cartwheel crossed the chapel yard. Alistair saw her waiting. So did the Living Oath Chapel. The candles bent toward the rain-dark arch where she stood, bone bead closed in her palm. Osgar turned slightly. Mistress Marrowen delays, even now. No, Eleanor said from the doorway. I am counting. The old woman with a sleeping child looked at her. Eleanor stepped inside only then. The chapel inhaled. Not for the king. For the witnesses. Alistair moved as if to meet her, then stopped before his body made a claim his words had not earned. Eleanor, he said quietly. She looked at the families instead. Are they listed? The clerk held up fresh parchment. By household. Mistress. No. The word struck the knave clean. The clerk froze. Eleanor walked to the altar steps. Not by household, by name. Household lists make women disappear behind husbands, children disappear behind fathers, widows disappear behind the dead. The oath called families, but the chapel must hear persons. Osgar's mouth thinned. This is sentiment dressed as procedure. No, Eleanor said. This is how displacement works. First you move a village, then you turn names into numbers, then you call the numbers manageable. A silence followed. Alistair turned to the clerk. By name. The clerk dipped his pen. Eleanor looked at Alistair. Do not say that like permission. His jaw tightened once. Recognized. The word was better. Not enough. A woman stepped forward from the first group. Maud Harrow, Orchard Road, 2 sons buried west of the Ash Bridge. The chapel wall flickered. Another man spoke. Tobin Vale, Mill Hollow, field taken for wolf cavalry pasture. Then a girl, perhaps 16, with mud on her skirt. Iris Penn, born after removal. My mother says our well is still there. The chapel breathed with each name. Osgar waited until several had been recorded, then lifted his voice carefully. Majesty, these statements prove suffering. They do not prove legal right to the Eastern Estates. Eleanor turned. No one asked grief to be the deed. Then what are they? The people your law injured before asking whether injury counted. Alistair looked toward the eastern wall, where the unfinished oath still waited. Let the chapel continue. No, Eleanor said. The entire court shifted. Osgar's eyes brightened. Again, obstruction. Eleanor held up the bone bead. Again, memory protected from being used badly. Alistair looked at her. What is missing? Equal standing. The chapel named them witnesses. The chapel did. Your court has not. Osgar gave a soft laugh. You would have landless refugees stand equal to crown witnesses in a royal oath inquiry? Eleanor faced him fully. Yes. The simplicity of it stripped the room. Alistair looked at the priest. Can displaced families stand as oath witnesses under Sainted Moon law? The priest hesitated. If the oath concerns them directly, old law permits affected witness standing. Osgar's voice sharpened. Permits? It does not require. The chapel floor cracked with silver light. No stone broke, but a line opened from the altar to the doorway, dividing nobles from families, crown from road, silence from breath. Words appeared along the line. Affected witness standing required. The priest bowed his head. Alistair turned to the families. You stand as witnesses, not claimants. Eleanor did not let relief show. Relief was not yet safety. She pointed to the front of the chapel. Then they stand here, not behind the court. Osgar stepped forward. Majesty, moving them before the nobles reverses every order of rank in the chapel. Eleanor's voice stayed quiet. Good. The old order is why your wall needed whitewash. Alistair looked at the nobles, then at the families. Make room, he said. No one moved quickly. So he stepped down first and pulled one of the carved benches aside himself. The sound of wood dragging over stone was rough, undignified, and more useful than any apology he could have offered. One by one, the families came forward. Eleanor watched them pass. She did not guide them like dependents. She did not stand in front as their savior. She stood at the side, holding the bead until her palm ached. Alistair stopped near her. Is this enough for the chapel? She looked at him then. Do not ask if it is enough for stone. Ask if it is enough for the people your crown kept outside. He absorbed that without defense. Then he faced the families. Is this enough to begin? Maud Harrow looked around the chapel, at the nobles forced backward, at the open doors, at Eleanor, then at the unfinished oath. For beginning, she said, not for ending. The chapel candles flared. Eleanor closed her eyes once. Then begin, she whispered. The bone bead warmed in her palm. The eastern wall brightened until every whitewashed layer became transparent. Beneath the unfinished oath, another line appeared, older and rougher than the rest. Not all displacement was caused by war. Oscar and Steele. The chapel breathed again, and the next words began to form. First removal order. The chapel did not write the rest at once. It made the room wait. That was worse for Duke Oscar Penrose than accusation. Waiting gave every displaced family time to look at him, not as a noble patron, not as an estate guardian, but as a man whose calm had begun to require too many explanations. The silver words deepened on the eastern wall. Not all displacement was caused by war. First removal order. The line shuddered. Osgar lifted his voice before it could finish. Majesty. Battlefield evacuations are often mistaken for schemes by those who suffered them. Pain remembers sharply, but not always accurately. Maud Harrow, standing at the front with rain still on her sleeves, answered him. My pain remembers the Penrose men who marked our doors before the soldiers came. A murmur moved through the displaced families. Alistair turned toward her. You saw Penrose men? Yes, Majesty. 3 days before the army road was announced. Osgar's face remained composed. Estate surveyors, necessary for wartime logistics. Eleanor looked at the wall. Let the chapel name necessity. The bone bead warmed in her hand. The eastern wall brightened. First removal order. Penrose Estate Survey, Eastern Orchard Road. Classified as temporary war clearing. Purchase offer filed before evacuation. Notice. The chapel went silent after that. No one else did. Voices broke among the families. Not loud enough to be riot. Too human to be ceremony. Orchard Road. Mill Hollow. Ash Bridge. Wells. Graves. Thresholds. Fields. Names of places the court had called estates because places sounded cleaner when no one remembered kitchens inside them. Osgar turned to Alistair. A purchase offer does not prove coercion. Noble houses often prepare contingency acquisitions during war to prevent abandoned land from falling into ruin. Eleanor's mouth hardened. Abandoned? She stepped toward him. Not close enough for impropriety, close enough for truth. People do not abandon graves because a duke finds their orchards convenient. Alistair looked at the relocation roll recovered from Penrose custody. Read the compensation field. The clerk bent over the parchment. His voice thinned. Compensation deferred until post-war review. Maud Harrow laughed once. It broke in the middle. My husband died before review. Another family spoke. Then another. Alistair lifted one hand. Not to silence them, but to steady the room. Every testimony will be recorded under name. Eleanor looked at him. Not testimony. Memory. He accepted the correction. Every memory will be recorded under name. The chapel breathed. At last, the unfinished oath on the eastern wall began to complete itself. The dead king's voice entered with it, rough and failing, but unmistakably royal. Let the families return. The air shook. The wall filled. The eastern war estates shall be returned from crown and noble claim into protected settlement land, governed by the displaced families who were removed under war order. No noble breathed freely. The families did. Not in joy yet. Joy would come later, perhaps after keys, walls, seed, law, roofs that no steward could take. But something entered their faces that looked older than hope. Recognition. Osgar's calm finally lost its polish. A dying promise cannot dissolve established titles without council ratification. Alistair turned toward him. Then I will call the council here. Maestu. And if they refuse to ratify a royal oath spoken under moon witness and confirmed by the Living Oath Chapel, they may refuse in front of the families your office displaced. Osgar's eyes chilled. You would fracture the eastern nobility in the first week of your reign. Alistair looked at the names forming along the wall. No, I inherited the fracture. I am finished calling it stability. He faced the chapel, then the court, then Eleanor. As Wolf King, I record that Eleanor Marrowen was banished from Sainted Moon Chapel for truthful testimony I did not have the courage to hear. I chose the official record because it protected land, rank, and a clean beginning. My father trusted her with his final breath, and I trusted the men who profited from silence. Eleanor felt the words strike somewhere she had guarded for too long. She did not let them become forgiveness. Not yet, Alistair continued. Duke Osgar Penrose is stripped of custody over Eastern War records, relocation rolls, chapel maintenance accounts, and all disputed estate claims pending judgment under Old Wolf law. The Eastern War estates are placed under Crown protection until the completed oath is enacted. Osgar stepped forward. You cannot build governance from grief. Maud Harrow answered before Alistair could. Then stop building profit from it. The chapel candles flared. Eleanor closed her eyes once. When she opened them, the Eastern Wall had written one final instruction beneath the completed oath. Settlement Council to be named by affected families. Not by Crown, not by Penrose. A sound passed through the room that was almost a sob and almost a prayer. Alistair looked at Eleanor. This was the final clause. She nodded. Yes. You kept it because they had to hear it before we used it. Before you owned it, she said. His face tightened, but he did not defend himself. Good. Eleanor turned to the families. Name your first council. The court startled as if she had placed a crown in the hands of the poor. She had not. She had placed the oath where it belonged. Maud Harrow stepped forward, then Tobin Vale, then Iris Penn's mother, thin and shaking, but standing. Names were spoken, written, confirmed, not by noble favor, but by chapel witness. Only when the First Settlement Council stood before the altar did the bone bead cool in Eleanor's palm. Its work was done. Alistair approached her slowly, stopping several steps away. I have no right to ask you to stay, he said. No. I know. Do you? His voice lowered. I know the man I asked you to trust did not arrive when you needed him. That hurt because it was true. Eleanor looked toward the eastern wall, where King Rowan's final promise glowed steady at last. Then let him arrive in the laws you write after this room empties. I will. Do not say it for me. I will say it for them first. That answer reached her. Not enough to return her heart to his hands. Enough to leave the door inside her unbarred. She stepped past him and placed the bone prayer bead on the altar before the displaced families. Then she turned back. When the first homes are built, Eleanor said, ask me again as Alistair, not as king. His eyes shone, but he did not reach for her. I will wait until the land answers. Eleanor walked out of Sainted Moon Chapel beside the families, not behind them, not before them. Behind her, the Living Oath Chapel breathed once more. This time, it sounded like a promise kept.